One of the most baffling developments within Game of Thrones is Daenerys Targaryen's final act turn from a sympathetic hero into a city burning monster. We see in the second two episodes of the series that Daenerys just turns on a dime and completely turns into someone who really does not resemble this character we've gotten to know for 8 years at that point. I think it was 9. They took an extra year for season 8 or 7, one of those two. I don't remember. It's been a million years. Regardless, Daenerys' turn is something that really doesn't make sense in the context of the show. She's been built up over the previous 8 seasons as someone who's extremely sympathetic. She has understandable goals and mostly works to create a better world in which all of her subjects can rule. We see this throughout her stay in Essos, primarily in Meereen, and we see it develop further as she continues on to Westeros. She repeatedly expresses in seasons 6, 7, and 8 that she has no desire to be Queen of the Ashes. She doesn't want to rule over a land that has been essentially dominated by her dragons. But in the final episodes, specifically in The Bells and The Iron Throne, she takes this turn just because I guess Jon Snow doesn't like her and her friend Missandei died, and because of that, she's going to burn a city of innocents to the ground. She never cared much for them, innocent or otherwise. However, that might not always be the case. The books are going to be different from the show. George Martin has taken great lengths to say that in the past, specifically on his blog. And we have a Daenerys at the current point in the books who is very much in this transformational state. Her final chapter in A Dance with Dragons illustrates kind of a very much inflection point in her mind, and I think that the current situation in Meereen will very likely explain her trajectory and why she might end up in a more, if not villainous, more perceived villainous role in the Winds of Winter. The main issue with Daenerys right now is that following the Battle of Fire at the beginning of the Winds of Winter, she is likely to surround herself with a ton of evil people. Yeah, there are some bright spots of good, notably in Strong Belwas and Missandei, who's actually 12 in the books, but most of the other people who are supporting her, if not evil, are very much trying to profit off of her power. They see that she is the only individual in Westeros who has dragons, or not Westeros necessarily, but the entire world of Ice and Fire, and hopes to essentially hitch their wagon to her to gain more power for themselves, their houses, or just their goals as a whole. There are a number of individuals who do seem to be kind of trying to take advantage of this, and I'm going to go through them in order of how likely I think they are to be damaging to the realm as a whole and to Daenerys' trajectory as a ruler and as a person. I'm going to start with Barristan Selmy for a couple reasons. I personally believe that Barristan Selmy is not long for this world. I think he's going to die in the first few chapters of The Winds of Winter, and I think that overall his death is going to be kind of pushing Daenerys down this path that tends towards darkness. But if he is alive, I could see Barristan continuing to push Daenerys down that direction on his own as well. Specifically given the fact that we know that he's good, he's a good man, supposedly, but he does tend to be much more driven by the idea of honor and vows and doing what is perceived as right as opposed to what is actually right. Specifically, we see this throughout his tenure with Aerys II Targaryen. We see him enforcing the will of this king who is evil, despite the fact that this will is clearly hurting those around the king. Barristan is someone who does the law no matter who the law hurts, and I think that if further applied to Daenerys, especially if Daenerys is pushed to a darker place by some of the others around her or her circumstances in general, Barristan has a potential to be pretty dark in the future as well. But I do think he's dead. Sorry, there's a car in the background. Next up in terms of potential danger is Jorah Where My Hug At Mormont. I don't think he's going to be particularly dangerous for Dany, but he is someone who is very much willing to go to whatever lengths necessary to achieve his ends. We see this via him informing on Daenerys for a potential pardon in the first couple of books. We also see this via the action that got him exiled in the first place, that being selling slaves. And I think that his devotion to Daenerys kind of fully blinds him to any potential evil that he might be doing. He is very much in love with Daenerys, and that is something that I see confused in terms of show watchers. Jorah is one of the characters who, in my eyes at least, is most improved in the show. He's much more sympathetic and a lot less creepy to Dany, while still being maybe a little creepy to Dany. But overall, I think that Jorah's kind of star has fallen, given the fact that he did betray Daenerys, and she is less likely to listen to him. Speaking of people who Daenerys isn't likely to listen to, Victarion Greyjoy is up next. I've seen people throw his name out as someone who's going to die early in the Winds of Winter. I don't personally believe that. I think he probably will survive at least most of the book. But I do think that he's someone who is going to be supporting Daenerys throughout the wars to come. He is known to be kind of lusting after her dragons and after her. I think that while Daenerys obviously wouldn't give him a dragon and probably wouldn't marry him, even though he does kind of fall into her type now that I think about it, with like Drogo and Dario and all those. Victarion is very clearly evil. I would make an argument that he is our most evil viewpoint character. I've seen people argue Cersei, but I think that if we're looking at the two of their resumes, I think Victarion clears pretty easily. But I think that Victarion is very clearly not the smartest, not the brightest bulb in the bulb jar. I don't know what the full phrase is. But regardless, I think that his at least perceived lack of intelligence, given that he's not very intelligent, is enough to kind of cause Daenerys to maybe not necessarily heed all of his advice in any degree that is not purely naval intelligence. Taking a break from all these bad influences, the Quinn the GM YouTube channel can serve as an excellent influence on your YouTube subscriptions page. Be sure to subscribe and like this video today. The individual I would deem as the second most dangerous to Daenerys in terms of pushing her into evil is one Marwyn the Mage. Marwyn is an Archmaester of the Citadel. He is very powerful there, as he is the person who's in charge of the Maester's study of the higher mysteries and magic. He has a link of Valyrian steel chain along with a rod and mask of that same metal, and given his studies into the supernatural, he is a very interesting character. What little we get of him in A Feast for Crows, which is the only book in which he's concretely appeared, is that he's this kind of conspiracy theorist who is very much against most of the Maesters, as he blames them for killing the dragons the last time around. He seems to be kind of a dark and dangerous figure who could end up creating this paranoia that he seems to have within himself, within Daenerys. That said, he's not the highest on this list for a couple of reasons. He has no concrete connection to Daenerys, and the only way that the two of them do have somewhat of a link, pun intended for the Maester, is through Mirri Maz Duur. You see, Marwyn the Mage is actually the individual who taught Mirri Maz Duur how to heal, which could have a great impact on Daenerys, as she very much thinks of Mirri Maz Duur as this malicious figure who killed her husband and son, despite the fact that she does seem to be at least somewhat sympathetic in the books. She's a bit more overtly malicious in the show, but in the books, it's kind of ambiguous as to whether she was trying to kill Drogo and Rhaego. I think the most dangerous person for Daenerys, and I don't think this is particularly controversial, is Tyrion Lannister. In the books, Tyrion has gone on quite the heel turn. His entire journey throughout Dance is a massive, just kind of track through Essos, where he's trying to cause as much destruction as possible. The one interaction we've seen him have with another Targaryen ruler, that being Aegon the Sixth Targaryen, who will respectively take the throne before Daenerys does, was convincing this young king to go west to Westeros and invade before Daenerys. It's likely that convincing Aegon of this will lead to tens of thousands of deaths in Westeros and other places, and I think that very much just shows the place where Tyrion is right now. He's concerned with revenge. He's concerned with his own goals. He doesn't care about anything else other than seeing his siblings brought low, and very much he is in this dark place. And A Dance with the Dragon's conclusions, he ends with this kind of desire reaffirmed to live again. He doesn't necessarily want to die, which he did want to for most of the book before that, but he still really doesn't want to do good. He's someone who's driven by vengeance and by this kind of slight that the world has done him, which is kind of valid given his experience, but I think that he could very much lead Daenerys down a dark path, as we know him to be both very wise and very persuasive to rulers in the past. It's also worth noting Daenerys' own perspective herself. Daenerys 10, A Dance with Dragons, her final chapter and the final non-epilogue chapter of that book as a whole, is often derided as kind of an anticlimax for the book and just kind of made fun of for her, quote, shitting brown water passage. But I think that there is a lot more to that chapter than people tend to give it credit for. I'll go more into depth on this in a video in the future, but Daenerys' entire journey throughout A Dance with Dragons deals with her trying to maintain peace in Meereen, and everything she is willing to give up to achieve this goal. The final chapter, Daenerys 10, shows a complete rejection of this aim. Specifically, we see her alone in the desert, not necessarily desert, but this grassland, just her and Drogon on their own, and Daenerys is brought back essentially to her roots. She is a dragon alone in the wilderness, and we see there that she really begins to let these kind of ideals of peace pass. Daenerys' story in A Dance with Dragons begins and is defined by the presentation of a corpse to the queen. Specifically, a sheep farmer presents his daughter's charred bones, having been killed by Drogon as the dragon was loose on the countryside. Daenerys continually thinks of this child, Hesea, throughout the entirety of A Dance with Dragons. However, come her final chapter in Daenerys 10, she is unable to remember Hesea's name. This shows that the essentially fear that she held within her that these dragons were destructive and this part of herself needed to be chained as she chained the dragons was essentially irrelevant. It's forgotten in the desert where only the essential remains. Fire and blood is her only way forward, and that path seems to be the one that will lead her to Westeros, potentially in a more villainous role than she arrived in Game of Thrones. I also think that arriving on Westeros after Aegon is going to play a role in Daenerys' turn to villainy. I talked about this a bit in a video about a year ago, but Aegon already being on the throne and potentially being a false dragon does seem like it would set Daenerys off. This individual who is known to be fake is claiming your birthright, the thing that you have desired for as long, not as long as you can remember. Viserys desired it for that time, but for this thing that you've desired and worked for so long, and just seeing it completely snatched away from you by someone who, seemingly, at least in her eyes, doesn't deserve it if she thinks he's a Blackfire. That would make a lot more sense than her killing Cersei and the people of King's Landing, as if the people of King's Landing are adoringly cheering for Aegon as opposed to somewhat tolerating Cersei. That would create a lot of anger in a potential ruler. What are your thoughts on Daenerys' story going into the Winds of Winter? I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments below. While you're down there, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. I really appreciate it, and it does really help me grow the channel. It just really makes me feel good, and especially going into House of the Dragon Season 2, which is coming up here in, I think, about a month from when I'm posting this. I'd really appreciate any and all support, as I will have many more videos coming out, both on the books and on the TV series. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I look forward to seeing your thoughts in the comments below. I'm done with my first year of law school now, so hopefully videos and streams are going to be a bit more frequent, at least until my summer associateship starts. Thank you all so much for watching again, and I will see you all soon. Goodbye!